Okay, so this is the policy committee meeting. It's June 4th, calling to order at 4:06 p.m. Do a quick roll call just to make sure we can hear everybody. Patricia Yeager, the chair, Mr. Davis,
Here.
co-chair, and then members, Dr. Gant
Here.
and Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Great, thank you. Do I have a motion to amend or adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
thank you. All in favor of
Aye.
adopting?
Aye.
the agenda? Okay, thank you. Dr. Maddox? Looks like she hung. Gonna give us a thumbs up. Dr. Maddox? We can't hear you. Uh-oh. Tawana, are you there? Can you try calling back in? Okay, well, I guess we have a quorum with 3. Is that correct? Even without her vote?
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the May 21st meeting. Do we have a
So moved.
motion? Okay. Do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, great, thank you. Okay, then the next thing on the agenda, I believe, is the superintendent report. Dr. Thomas.
Yes, ma'am. I do not have any specific items related to policy. So for me today, it's just a matter of us continuing to work through the policies that Dr. Myers has worked with you all to revise and update as part of our continuing work on our policy manual.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, this is an extra meeting, you might recall. So the goal of this meeting was to make some hay through the policy. So, okay, and I will say the same thing for the policy committee chair report, which is let's use our time today wisely and get through as many of these 17 policies that we can get through. Just a heads up, we are aiming to get through as many as possible. The ones that we get through will be numbered 6.8 onward, and we will load them up and hopefully add them to the agenda for the work session tonight. I realize that doesn't give people very much time to look at them. We can go over them briefly for the full work session, but mostly put them up for moving to public comment over the next 4 weeks so that they can get up on the website. And we can have more discussion about them if we want tonight, or more discussion next week or 4 weeks from now. But we are going to try to get them through tonight's agenda if possible. Okay, so any questions about that or comments about that? Great, thank you. Let's moving on. So first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Pruitt for all of your interesting and helpful comments. This is a lot of good work here. Oops, there's someone. So Tawana is saying in the chat box, I said I can hear you. Okay, well, we cannot hear you, but you're muted. So I can now see your faces moving. It was frozen before, Dr. Maddox. So. All right, well, let's, if you have comments and we can't hear you, you can type them in. All right, so the first policy that we're going to try to tackle, I need to pull up a bigger version of my agenda because I cannot see the little one in the window. Hang on. All right, so the first one is GAAA, which is Equal Opportunity Employment. This policy was last reviewed in 2017, so it's not one of the really old ones. But the comments from Mr. Pruitt suggests that we may want to remove or simplify two of the statements. So at the moment, it's just to review, but he's recommending that we reduce or remove parts 4 and 5, which have to do with religious practices and disabilities. Mr. Pruitt, would you like to discuss this a little bit further, or Dawn or Meredith? Do you have comments about this for everybody?
I'll start since it was my comment. It's just that, the others are pretty straightforward. They're the things that federal law requires us to say. Reasonable accommodation is, obviously a case by case basis. Every time that issue comes up, somebody on staff calls me, we talk through it. I look at case law and we figure out what is a reasonable accommodation under those unique circumstances. It's really hard and somewhat dangerous to try to reduce all that to a few paragraphs.
Yes. Okay. So you recommended deleting entirely sections 4 and 5 and replacing them with a sentence that said CCSD provides reasonable accommodation as required by law.
Right.
So
And that would be helpful for us in HR as well, because we do review every single one of them on a case-by-case basis, as Mike said, just like we're required to. And things change over time, maybe a little faster than we review policy. So, that works well for us to just remove those two and to continue to operate on a case-by-case basis.
do we need to add a sentence that says that's what we do, or we recommend operating on a case-by-case basis rather than a broad brush or something? No.
I mean, we don't need them at all. If we want a placeholder, we can just say something to that effect, that we recognize that's our obligation.
Yeah. Okay.
Or the sentence that Mike suggested, we could replace it with, CCSD provides reasonable accommodations as required by law, and maybe and evaluated on a case-by-case basis if you wanted to include that second part.
That's good.
Okay. Do we need to keep or retain the words religious practices and disabilities, or are we deleting those altogether? Or do we need, it seems like we want to leave them in there.
I don't think that's what's being proposed.
I would say we would just, maybe if we struck through all of the current section 4 and 5 and made a new number 4 that just was called reasonable accommodations and wasn't subcategoried by those two.
Okay.
And that would contain the sentence that says CCSD provides reasonable accommodation as required by law and evaluated on a case-by-case basis, because all of those are required by law.
Okay.
Absolutely perfect.
Angela, did you get that? So Angela's going to prepare a single document for us with these recommendations for the board meeting later.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what the sentence is supposed to say?
Yes, ma'am, I'll repeat it for you. So the new section 4 will just be called reasonable accommodations. And underneath that, the sentence will say, CCSD provides reasonable accommodation as required by law and evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And then we would strike all of the current section 4 and 5.
Before
And
we,
the only other thing is that current section 6 complaint procedures needs to now be section 5.
Right.
well, before we do that, can we, at what point do we discuss this?
Now.
Okay. Because I have some problems doing this. And first off, is that taking section 4, I'm not sure that people are well versed in the fact that this is case law. And, perhaps they should be, but I don't think that a whole lot of people think about that when it comes to employment. And so, I see us leaving that in there kind of to state, even though it is case law and as well as, I guess, actual federal and state law, right, Mike?
Well, that's generally a matter of federal law. It's First Amendment for religious practices. It's ADA for disabilities. It's the Pregnancy Discrimination Act for pregnancy, which we don't mention, but it's up there in our general statement. So, it's any number of different laws and then the cases that interpret them.
So, I guess that, that I have a problem just striking it, because then we're not clearly, for somebody who is looking for it, clearly making that statement. Now, I don't know what other school districts do. But anyway, I have a question there. And then in terms of the accommodations for disabilities, I would think that is generally what people are aware of in general, but we have specific steps involved, which I don't know if they're common sense or not, and maybe they should be in the regs. I don't know, but it just seems to me that it's good to explain the steps. So anyway, that I just have some reservations.
Mr. Davis, if I could help from the HR point of view, kind of explain how we navigate this process, that might help with some of your concerns. You'd be surprised. We get asked a lot about accommodations for everything, religion, returning to work following having a baby, things like that. That's very common. Teachers will typically either ask HR directly or they'll ask their principal, but how we navigate this is something we deal with quite regularly. And actually the ADA version is probably the least common thing that we hear. And so they are reaching out to us. Most of them aren't familiar with the policy, but they know that there is some obligation to provide for accommodation. We take each one of those as they come on a case-by-case basis. Some of them are very common, such as nursing mothers returning from pregnancy leave, and how you accommodate them in the workforce. Some of them may be, less common, a very specific accommodation that's needed, but all of those we evaluate. My only concern, and I think this was Mike's concern as well with having it written in the policy, is ADA, FMLA, things like that. Those are things that every politician likes to play with all the time. And so when federal law starts moving around, if we haven't gone back and updated our policy is now in conflict with the law. But I can assure you that every single one of those cases we run through Mike with suggested accommodations for review every time. And so they are very familiar with how this process works in general. And I would say this is probably one of our more commonly used practices, is how do we accommodate a need for whatever reason in HR.
And I'll add to that, the religious accommodations is pretty short and, it says about all you can say without getting into details. The ADA, when the disabilities in Section 5 gets into a lot of details that, it may be appropriate, it may not. The ADA is designed to require the employer to engage in a flexible conversation back and forth with an employee to determine if there is a covered disability, and if so, what a reasonable accommodation is. It is not a step-by-step thing. It's designed not to be. It's designed to require us to be reasonable.
So Greg, if we step back, well, let's first of all, Dr. Maddox or Dr. Gant, do you have any additional thoughts on that point?
I don't.
I
Yeah, I'm sort of leaning towards what Mr. Davis has said. Um, I would have some concerns pulling it out, although like if it is our practice already, then I wouldn't see necessarily, I'm not sure that pulling it out, I'm not sure of the danger yet and keeping it in. And maybe I'm not understanding something here, but I'm not understanding like the legal implications or danger of keeping it in.
All right, so I don't think there's any danger in the religious accommodations. It's one sentence and it, again, it doesn't go into detail. Number 5 goes into a lot of detail that might be appropriate or might not for a given situation. It might steer you down a wrong path if you don't do what the ADA itself tells you to do, which is
Right.
engage in a conversation. Then having those 2 things in there, religion and disability, leaves out other circumstances we're required to provide
Right.
reasonable accommodations in.
Yeah. I mean, this one looks like it's been added to and added to and added to over time. And so I would like us to consider stepping back and looking at the whole thing. So the first paragraph, the purpose paragraph, says that we do not discriminate on the basis of a whole long list of things. And we can decide whether that list is adequate or not. The second one says we will not discriminate based on any of those things, including all of these details. The third paragraph is non-discrimination. Pulls out sexual orientation, which I realized not too long ago was a very important thing to pull out. But it's now, sexual orientation is actually in the above statement on non-discrimination. So it's number 3 that actually seems a little bit unnecessary also. And then, so it seems like the third section could just be the statement of accommodation for religious practices, disabilities, etc.
I think you're right. I agree.
And then the fourth paragraph would then be complaint procedures as a policy. So that would simplify this sort of, looks like kind of a hodgepodge of things pasted on, without losing the intent, which is that we do not discriminate against any of these groups, and we do accommodate all of these conditions, these issues. Is that fair to say, or is that, what do people think,
Great,
Greg?
Dr. Shear. That would help a lot. I didn't even realize until you said that. That seems unnecessary to me as well, based on the list at the beginning.
Because we don't have marriage gay marriage is not an issue anymore, right? And it probably was a few years ago. So the whole part about domestic partnerships versus gay marriage, thankfully, is not an issue anymore.
Right. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Greg, what do you think?
Well, I'm looking at where it says equal opportunity employment. And I know this sounds like a splitting hairs, but I initially looked at that first paragraph as saying, great, if I'm whatever religion, I won't be discriminated against for hiring.
Okay.
But then you start talking about religious practices. Well, maybe, I'm not, being hired is one thing, but then being able to practice a certain faith that's well established seems a little bit different to me. And so, I mean, I guess that's what really sticks out with me. Now, I know that the disabilities, presumably, is that same split. I guess I'm trying to look at it both in terms of hiring. Yes, we'll hire you, but that doesn't mean we're going to let you practice, or yes, we will hire you, but that doesn't mean we want that we're going to accommodate you for your disability. We will hire you as a disabled person, but we won't necessarily accommodate you. And
No, but that's what section 3 would be. We would have an accommodation paragraph that was just inclusive, I think. And we could list, would you feel better if we listed specific accommodations? Would that, CCSD provides reasonable accommodations for A, B, C, D, et cetera.
That would
Or
be, that
would
would
that
be
be better?
better. Yeah, I mean, you're getting at what, you're getting it closer. I guess I am kind of struck by what Mike wrote in terms of his description of the changes. He says, as required by law. So, Mike, we don't, as a district, go beyond the law, right? Is that on this type of issue? I mean, we're just going into dangerous territory if we don't let Congress or the state legislature determine what is and is not discrimination.
Well, I mean, that certainly provides the baseline for us. If we want to go beyond that, then you would have to define how far you're going beyond it and in what way, so you can do it equally every time that comes up. And that would be very difficult. That sort of keeps the whole country's legal system busy doing that already.
Could I mention something? I think what I hear Mr. Davis saying is he's concerned that we're stating in the first paragraph that we're not discriminating on hire, but not in other ways. Actually, it says in our employment practices. And so that would be everything from onboarding to offboarding. Our employment practices would be really the entire duration. Maybe we could word that in a better way to be more clear on that, to say, instead of employment practices, maybe say, throughout the duration of your employment, or something that maybe alluded to the fact that this wasn't something that was just offered at hire, but was a non-discrimination practice for your entirety of employment. To maybe
Well, I don't lose sight of, again, back to the law. So all of these things, if you made a legal claim for discrimination on one of these bases, you would have to, one of the elements you'd have to show is an adverse employment action. So accommodation of religious practices, for example, doesn't happen in a vacuum. What the accommodation means is, for example, I need to take off a day to celebrate Ramadan or whatever it might be. Well, that's going to manifest in either the employer lets the person do it or the employer doesn't. And if they do, that inherently means the employer is taking some adverse action. They dock your pay, they fire you, they write you up, whatever. So it's all covered. It doesn't, discrimination doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because your employer punished you somehow for something they shouldn't have.
And I understand what you're saying, Mike. That's, if I could summarize it, that's kind of lawyer understanding. And I'm just looking at someone, let's say a Muslim is hired. Oh yeah, we don't discriminate. No problem at all. And then we end up in the situation where, like you just gave with Ramadan, and on a school basis, and I'm just making this up totally, but an assistant principal tells the staff member, well, yeah, we hired you as a Muslim, but we really, we have this policy that before and after holidays, for instance, you can't have the day off. And it just so happens that you're asking for one of those days. So we're going to have to do something about that, either, and I don't want to get into what it is, but that's the type of situation that I'm concerned about in terms of making sure now, they can't do that, but I want the employee to be able to go to the policy and say, yeah, not only was I hired as a Muslim, but I've also, if I have strict Muslim practices that go along with my faith, then, I can see here that in terms of my employment day to day, that I can expect protection. Does that make sense at all?
So I understand what you're saying, Greg, but I think it's in here. I'm not sure that it's not in here.
Okay, where is it in there?
Well, so if we
Section 2, item 1.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, limiting, segregating, or classifying employees or applicants in any way which would deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect his or her status as an employee because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, or age.
And then number 1 is the same list of things, including religion, refusing to hire, discharging, or otherwise discriminating.
Yeah, it sure seems like it's comprehensive. So it feels like what we really need is just a third section on that we do accommodate when needed.
But what you just read doesn't have all, well, let's see, maybe it does. Never mind.
All of the list, you mean?
Yeah, never mind.
There could be a comma between religion, comma, sex. Well, so we've been talking for 15 minutes and this is the first one. Do we want to set this aside or can we get a consensus on how to update this one? What do you think, Greg?
Well, I want to hear from the other two members. I mean,
Okay.
I want to move quickly, but I don't. But if I'm the only objection, or if Linda has concerns, I just want to hear what other people have to say.
Okay. Linda, are you there? Or Dr. Gant? I think Tawana said she was.
I'm sorry, I am here, but I think simpler and cleaner is better.
Yeah, I agree. So you would be okay with the idea of having just 4 sections? The purpose prohibiting discrimination, the second list of non-discrimination statements, the third an accommodation statement that's all encompassing, and then the fourth being the complaint procedures.
If that's directed to me, yes, I think that would be great. I think it uncomplicates it, and I'm not trying to interpret it for the person who's trying to get the ruling. I think the individual case basis works.
Okay. Tawana, do I?
I work in here every day.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I agree with those 4 sections.
Okay. Dr. Gant, are you there? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm here. I think as long as it has in there the areas that are accommodated, as you mentioned,
Okay.
I think that would be good enough to send to the full board.
Okay.
Because I think that's what we're discussing here, is sending it to the full board. And then, I mean, the other part of that is, I have in the back of my mind that I know, similar to what Ms. Davis said, I also know that our policies, we have a lot of policy work ahead of us, and we're sort of on the fence, about stuff like policy reset, going through all of these and things like that. So I certainly think the simpler, the better, but I just want to be sure that people are not left out.
Absolutely agree with you on that one. So I think what I heard, Meredith, to your sentence that you gave Angela, do we need to add the list to those? So instead of just saying CCSD provides reasonable accommodation as required by law, do we want to add the list of things, or?
Could we add to that sentence on a case-by-case basis for all groups as referenced above?
Okay.
That way we're just restating the same words over and over again. Sometimes when things get long, people stop listening and stop reading, and we just want them to know.
And you don't want to drop one accidentally. Yeah. Okay.
And then Angela, I think she was striking statement number 3. You already did that. Yeah, because it was redundant.
So
And so
CCSD
now that reasonable accommodations will become
Section
3.
reasonable accommodations will become section 3, and then the next one down will be section 4, which I believe is
complaint procedures.
procedures, yes.
But we were going to add for all of the groups above or something. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that becomes 4.
I have a quick question. Does reasonable start taking us down that path of interpretation?
I think that's what the law is, though, isn't
I
it?
think what we're required to do is to start and have a two-way conversation, like Mike mentioned. It really is, it has to be a back and forth conversation, and we just try to consistently be as employee friendly as we can and as accommodating as we can, because I mean, we need teachers and we need our staff, we need our custodians, we need everyone. And if they can come to work and do their job, then we're going to accommodate them as reasonably and as far as we can. That's just what we do by practice, is that two-way conversation goes back and forth. Mike in the loop just to make sure we're doing everything by the book and by the letter of the law. But we have conversations quite regularly and they are very participatory.
I believe that,
And
and so that happens at Athens Tech as well, but all of my letters just say accommodations. They don't talk about reasonableness of them.
Reasonable is the legal term. I mean, so it's actually in the ADA, it's in the case law for religious accommodation. There's also some pregnancy cases. Age is sort of an iffy one. The Age Discrimination Act, I don't think it doesn't directly require accommodation, but it can relate back. I mean, certain circumstances, it might relate to ADA. So anyway, those are the kinds of complications you get into. If you just say reasonable accommodation, you got a whole body of law that interprets what that means. And that's what Meredith and I talk about.
And the other thing I like about this edit is that we're deleting this very ridiculous sentence, unless the requested accommodation would impose an undue hardship on the school district's operations, which also seems redundant in the sense of a reasonable accommodation as ruled by case law is what that is, right? Or do we need that other part?
Well, if you just say reasonable accommodation is required by law, then you're covered. Now,
yep.
To tell you how stupid my occupation is, undue hardship is in that case law. It's actually in the ADA as a separate category, and they analyze them differently.
Oh, all right.
It's semantics, but yeah.
So we do or we do not need that?
We don't need it. If we
qualifying?
just say reasonable accommodation is required by law, we're encompassing everything.
Great, because I would like to get rid of that because it sounds ridiculous. So, okay, so are we there? Are we ready to vote to move this up to the board? Oops, you're muted, Greg.
So moved.
Is that a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And recall that this is, thank you. Recall that this is just moving it into comment period. So there's plenty of room for people to chime in and say, no, we want you to leave it the way it was. Okay. All right. So we've got, that will be 6.8 for tonight. Moving on, GAHB, staff political activities. This is again to be reviewed. It was last reviewed, 2011. And it's a fairly long, convoluted couple of paragraphs, 3 paragraphs about political activity. Mr. Pruitt has recommended that we delete these things and simply put that we employees cannot engage in political activity during work time, and that they cannot represent their personal views to be those of the CCSD, which are 2 pretty clear statements that sort of come out of those complicated paragraphs, but are not explicit. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Mr. Pruitt? Oops, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, that's another one that's complicated about what you can and can't do, and it's a lot of First Amendment judgment calls that are made in the case law. But but those are kind of the two very clear things. You can't use government resources to advocate a political view. So that was my first one. And then the second one, I had forgotten what it was. What's my second one?
You can't pretend to represent the district.
Oh, yes. And that's actually one we've had come up from time to time. It's never been a big deal, but there have been times we've had, teachers, whomever, write a letter to the editor, and it's kind of been discussed around the central office. Gee, it would have been really nice if they just put a sentence somewhere in there that this is my personal view and not that of my employer.
Right, right. Could we potentially add a third sentence, maybe in the first position, which says that political action and speech are protected by our Constitution, or we believe, so a big broad, again, I've spent some time in the last week trying to figure out what policies are supposed to do, and they're supposed to state our values. Can we add something like that that's sort of obvious, but still a statement of our values that we
Yeah, no,
believe
that's
that-
great. Legislation does that all the time, kind of a preamble or an introductory statement that's sort of saying, here's where we start and here's a couple of
Yeah.
rules under it. So that's fine.
Yeah, we believe in, the right that our staff, we believe that our staff has the right to be political and speak freely, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Not blah, 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 but something along those lines, that's protected by our Constitution. But they can't do it on their work time, on work resources, and they should not represent the district or pretend to represent the district. Okay, so I just talked a lot. Greg, Dr. Gant?
Strongly agree with Mike's suggestion. That first half of that sentence, that very long sentence, really kind of knocks you over the head. I mean, it should have been reversed, if anything.
Yeah,
That's right.
But I wouldn't, after reading that first part of the sentence, I wouldn't open my mouth. So yeah, I definitely think that the way that Mike's got that worded, and also talking about constitutional right to speech, I think is great.
Dr. Gant, sounded like you agreed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that the first part of that, to me, it skirts the line very closely. Well, actually, the whole first paragraph, because it talks about during the school day or at school sponsored events, and then you have to ask yourself, well, what is political endorsement? Is it because I have on a T-shirt, or because, it just, yeah, but yeah, I agree with the recommended changes.
Okay, Dr. Maddox? Or Linda, do you have any additional comment?
I think my comments would prolong this discussion, so I'm going to wait.
Okay,
Mike, do you think there's any value in keeping the very final sentence just because it answers a question that could be posed about an employee wishing to run for political office? Or is that just so obvious in the rest of the policy as recommended that we wouldn't need to say that?
It's actually almost so non-obvious we don't need to say it. There's a whole lot packed up in there about running for political office. Gosh, I couldn't even quote all of the rules on that off the top of my head.
And we actually do have a few employees who hold office in and around Athens in various roles. And they handle it just like anybody else who has a second job, which a lot of employees do. And so I agree with Mike. It's almost not necessary because there's already so much that takes care of it.
Yeah, actually, now I'm looking at it, what I was thinking about is sometimes it comes up, people want to run for, if somebody wanted to run for school board, and that'd get into an analysis of what they could do. But yeah, this is just saying, like, if somebody wanted to run for, if they live in Madison and want to run for mayor, why would we single that out from any other life activity they might engage in off the job? That's, yeah. That almost, even by mentioning it, it's almost like suggesting there's something wrong with it.
right. Okay. Angela, did you
We're
get
gonna
that?
strike everything, Angela, I think, and start over with basically the 2 sentences that are in the attorney memo, right?
Yeah. And Greg, help me with the first sentence about we believe in
Um,
political action, right, is a right supported by our,
say, you know, based on the First Amendment, Clarke County School District says the following or something. I don't know. I wouldn't make it very extensive.
How about just something as simple as the Clarke County School District values the rights of every employee to engage in political activity as guaranteed by the First Amendment? Something very flat.
I like that.
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. The Clarke County School District recognizes the rights
you just,
of every employee to engage in political activity as guaranteed by the First Amendment. Or as guaranteed by the Constitution. Mike, what's better?
That's good.
Constitution is broader.
Okay.
Guaranteed by the Constitution.
Do we want to say, yeah, okay. You said recognizes the right of every employee to engage. Yeah, okay. I think you said something about values and I didn't, yeah, recognizes. Okay,
What about just following up with the stipulations are 1 and 2?
right. You don't even need to, well, you don't, okay.
Or just go right into it, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think you need the rejoinder or whatever that's called.
Okay.
Just say,
Okay.
however, I guess. However, or just leave it. What do you think, Dawn?
I would take out the stipulations are and just have a second sentence that says what clarifies the rules.
Okay.
Yep.
Go with that.
Okay, awesome.
Very clear.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Dr. Thomas, you on board with that one? Okay,
Yes, it sounds good. I like that.
is there a motion out there to move this to the board?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of moving this to the board tonight? This will be 6.9. Aye.
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 All right, 4:48. Okay, GAL, which has to do with salary deductions. It was last revised in 2004. It has a paragraph about garnishing wages, which I understand is unnecessary. And then it has a paragraph about tax shelter annuities, which feels really old in its jargon and is actually really inaccurate. So the proposal is to completely rescind this entire policy, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Pruitt? You want to say a few words?
Yes, that is correct. There's actually the last independent clause of the last sentence under garnishments is also wrong now. And the tax shelter annuities provision is wrong now that we've shifted to this one provider. And you got something else on your agenda tonight that Chris Reiner's bringing some details of that. So it would need a lot of updating, but it's not required to have it. It's all governed by garnishments is governed by law. The deferred retirement plans, 403Bs and 457s are what they're really called, not annuities. Meredith can explain better than I can on that part, but that's all covered in their employee intake annual reviews. You want to take that part, Meredith?
Sure. What I was telling Mike when we had the conversation about rescinding this, and he addressed the first part perfect. The second part, this is the only benefit that we're singling out to address. And I'm not sure why. We automatically enroll people in TRS. We automatically, do all the things we're required to do. And all of this is covered in great detail every year in open enrollment. It's also covered in pretty great detail on hire. And then again, in our employee handbook, it feels a little weird to single out this one benefit to talk about. And like Mike said, the language in it's actually very dated and doesn't match practice anymore. It feels like one of those things that we're kind of bogged down in that we just don't need to really put in policy, because it's really, we're going to follow the law for garnishments and we don't single out any other benefit.
So there's an HR manual somewhere, right, that describes all this stuff, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So we don't need the policy at all. We just delete the whole thing. We don't need a sentence that says, see the HR manual. Okay.
Most districts do not have this policy. I went around to most of the North Georgia districts, and so did Chris Griner, trying to see what they say about this. And we are one of the very, very few who have a GAL.
Okay. All right. Other questions or comments? Are people okay moving this forward?
Yes.
I'm fine.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second,
All in favor of moving the rescinding of this policy completely forward to the board?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
aye.
All right. Thank you. So that will be 6.10, 6.10. Okay. All right, so moving onward to staff rights and responsibilities. Okay, so this one I think is also recommended to be rescinded. It was last revised in 2002. It's one of the old ones. Mr. Pruitt, you said it's been revised and put into B policies.
Yeah, when I looked at this, it just struck me, and of course, you guys all went through this more than I did, but this looks like sort of a hodgepodge of independent ideas that you guys have spent the last few years really fleshing out in a lot more detail and more thorough analysis and other B policies.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem to refer to staff. It just talks about it says no employee or agent of the district shall be prohibited or discouraged from freely communicating to the BOE. But yeah, so yeah, you're right. It seems like it's redundant.
Let me step in here mainly because I feel strongly about leaving this in, and so if I don't want to stretch out the session just for that, but my rationale is that with the B policies is where the board talks about how we are to interact with or not interact with and how we conduct ourselves. I actually sent a copy of this policy out. It's just ironic, a few days ago to someone who called me up and said, how come staff cannot address board members, cannot contact board members? I said, where did that come from? But I've heard that before. And so, in fact, I've heard that a whole lot in the time I've been on the board. So, if I did anything, I would want to promote this policy, not do away with it. That's my 2 cents, but I don't want to drag out the meeting because this may be a long discussion.
With the board, you mean? Or?
I'm talking about even among the policy committee. I mean, that unless
Okay.
I could be outvoted very easily, but I'm just saying, I'm not even if somebody wants to play around with some wordsmithing, I'm fine with that. But and the title of it, I do agree with Mike, it doesn't really fit. And I actually did a little bit of research, and GAM in the state of Georgia is used so many different ways. In Fulton County, it's the reporting of drug and alcohol use. And in Gwinnett, it's mandatory reporting of employee crimes. So I would be glad to change the title. Apparently, Mike, we have flexibility of how we title. I thought these policies had names attached to them.
Well, remember GSBA attaches names to them, but we're not using the GSBA system now. We're using the board docs when it lets us change the names.
Okay. Well, so these other districts literally changed the name differently than when we changed the name.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting that out there that this would be a long discussion for me if it were to be removed, and unless I was outvoted.
So Greg, if I heard, go ahead.
I would advise we look carefully, because I do think the sentence that begins likewise, I agree that it starts with what staff should or shouldn't do, but likewise, members of the Board of Education shall not be prohibited or discouraged from freely communicating directly with employees is in direct conflict with some of what we've talked about in Bs.
Yeah. So can we at least delete that part, perhaps? Or not? Oops, you're muted. Greg, you're muted.
Yeah. Let me look at that. Which line, Don?
The second sentence. Likewise.
Yeah, no, I'm that to me belongs in the B policy. I'm not quibbling about that. No.
And the final sentence is, any negative employment action taken in retaliation against any employee for communications described herein shall be contrary to Board of Education policy and may be subject to disciplinary action by the board. That seems a little like not right either.
Well, it's kind of, we don't have retaliatory discipline practices at all.
Thankfully. So what if we just left the first sentence, Greg? Would that be enough?
Well,
And change the name to staff communication with the board or something like that?
I would do that, but also the sentence, the First Amendment rights of all employees will be protected. So those two sentences.
Okay. Mike, what do you think about that?
I think that makes sense. That's fine.
So we changed the name, GAM's name changes to staff communication to the board?
That sounds good to me.
Or
I'm not
with the board?
Yeah.
With board members? And then we leave the first sentence. We delete the second sentence. And we delete the final sentence.
Would we want to provide any of what I know we have as kind of common sense guidance where supervisors would encourage employees to follow a chain of command and respect their employment chain of command, not in any way denying them access to their board members. But I think things can get really complicated if employees are sharing information. If board members are requesting information, we have a process by which that goes through the superintendent. And if there's also information, I don't know how to write in policy, which seems to be kind of common sense.
Hey, Dawn, as the person who kind of gets this when community members make a complaint to the board, we kind of have a process that addresses that. When a community member makes a complaint to a board member, typically the board member relays that to the superintendent, who then distributes it out where it should. A lot of times that does go to HR for investigation, into the
I'm talking not about community members. I'm
Right.
talking about staff.
Staff, right. Staff.
Oh, I am too.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, I am too. In fact, there's several people on this phone call who have had complaints by staff members that have gone through my office this year. This policy happens. I mean, because you guys are public figures. They see you, they know your face. let me tell you what my problem is, and y'all try to address it. And it gets routed back to a lot of times HR to try to fix whatever the concern is. And we do this in practice a good bit. At least a half dozen times a year, we'll have something where a staff member will happen to see a member of the board at, say, a function at the school or Walmart or wherever.
Uh-oh.
That does happen. And we reach out and try to investigate and resolve and make sure that we've done whatever we need to do. If y'all want to put any more wording, but it does work pretty well in practice.
Oh, I think, we have a couple of issues, or not issues. I think people are thinking about this from a couple of potential scenarios. So I work for the school district. Mr. Worthy is my representative. I know the district is talking about, whatever, I don't know, going to totally digital learning or whatever. I see Mr. Worthy, and as an employee, I just say, I really have concerns about that. I really think there's a value of a teacher. That versus I'm an employee, I see Mr. Worthy, and I say, I really can't stand that hateful boss of mine at the board office. Sonona is difficult to work with. So they're two real different kind of issues maybe, but I think the issue more than what the individual is allowed to say becomes how board members respond to that. So then we do have a policy that talks about kind of that chain of command. If issues and concerns are brought to board members, then the board member brings that to the superintendent. So is that more of, do we fix it more with in how the board member responds, or do we try to fix it from what the person can say? Because the appropriate board response would be to take that to the superintendent and I take it to the right place versus the board member picking up the phone and calling the principal and saying, I hear you've really been mean to Sonona.
I think that's excellent, Zanona. I think that's an excellent diagnosis of it. And I
agree.
I mean, the burden is on the board member. Is the one who is supposed to be versed in policy. And if we don't appreciate the chain of command, if we don't encourage employees on relevant subjects to or topics to follow the chain of command, then it's on us. And there is a big difference between, saying, I don't think it's safe to go back to school versus I can't stand my boss. One is a discussion, pros and cons. The other is a direct, it should go up the chain of command. It has, very quickly. So I like the way you phrased it better, but yes.
So then we
So,
wouldn't need the sentence Don recommended?
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
Don, you still want to advocate for it?
Can I jump in a second? Because what Zanona just described is pretty much the case holding of the Supreme Court in the Garcetti case about 11 years ago. So there is this, so an employee of a government agency has First Amendment rights to speak on matters of public concern that are common with other members of the public. There is no protected First Amendment right to speak out on matters that are directly related to your employment. So in the Garcetti case, there was an assistant district attorney who was directed to do something that he disagreed with. He wrote a memo, sort of went around his boss, the district attorney, wrote to, I don't remember if it was the county commissioner or whomever, complaining about, these things he thought were wrong. He was fired for that. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, well, you were talking about something that was within the scope of your job duties. That's not protected First Amendment stuff. So if you leave the two sentences that you've talked about, I mean, they're superficially correct. There's nothing wrong with them. There's a whole lot of stuff under there, and we're kind of mixing apples and oranges. I just talked about First Amendment protections from the employee's perspective of doing the speech. Then there's this other set of concerns about what you as board members can and should do when somebody speaks to you. And they're not really, I don't think, that much different for an employee or any other member of the community, at least according to, these cognitive things and your B policies. It all sort of goes through the chain of command. So I may have complicated it more, but I just wanted to lay that legal foundation before we go further.
So this says freely communicating about matters of public concern directly to any member of the Board of Education. So that distinguishes it from complaining about their job. Is that what I hear?
It does, but I mean, there's a whole lot of devil and a whole lot of details underlying those simple words.
Other thoughts?
I'm not sure, Mike. So what, I mean, are you disagreeing with the two sentences, or are you suggesting advertising, promoting a clarification, or?
No, I'm not. Well, I was trying not to promote anything. I was just trying to point out that there are two things we're talking about here. From a First Amendment protection standpoint, the first and third sentence, and the third sentence just refers to the First Amendment itself. So those are fine. I'm just saying there's a lot of complication underlying it that you look at on a case-by-case basis. And then I'm also saying that, and I'm agreeing with you. So I'm fine leaving those two sentences there as this policy. And I'm agreeing with you that, how you respond to people is your problem, not the person talking to you's problem. Now, I would point out, just for this is not a legal consideration, but if you encourage people to talk to you and then you're handcuffed with this kind of stilted answer every time, does that create an awkward situation? But
Well, I would rather us be in that awkward situation than to see eliminating this policy totally and say it's implied somewhere else. So anyway, I don't want to continue the discussion. I'm fine with the two sentences.
Okay, so it looks like Angela's already, go ahead, Dawn.
And it's fine to leave it as is. Shorter is better. I guess my only thought would be to add a sentence that would clarify it's not a matter of public concern to signal to an employee if you have a more personal matter or something that doesn't rise to the level of public concern, you should follow the appropriate protocols and work within the structure, the hierarchy structure of your own supervisor. That it's not talking to the board member isn't the trump card that gets laid on top of a concern. That's my only worry. And
can I help with this a little bit? We have another policy that talks about complaints and grievances, and it typically talks about address it with your supervisor first, unless there's some reason why you feel like that would be, maybe your complaint is with your supervisor, and then you would work your way up to, I guess, HR, then a board member. So we do address that chain of command in the complaints and grievances policy. And we talk about attempting an informal resolution to a problem first, and then you would enter the more formal phase of making a complaint against someone to your supervisor or to HR or to whoever. So we do have a place where we do address these more workplace grievances in a pretty step-by-step manner, if that helps at all.
I think it does.
So we do not need to add it here or point to it here. We can just leave it. Okay. Well, looks like Angela made all those changes. She's changed the title. She's left the first sentence. And she's left the First Amendment sentence. So that looks good to me. Do we have a motion to move this up to the board?
Well, we haven't heard from Lakeisha and
Oh, I think, okay.
Dr. Maddox.
I said that I agree with you. I full-heartedly agree with you. And my discussion would be a lot on that topic from personal experience. I definitely think we should leave that in, and it should fall on us the way that we handle those type of situations. I agree with what you said. So
Okay.
I don't have anything to say, to add.
Okay.
Okay, so you're happy with the 2 sentences remaining
Yes.
and rechanging the name, communications with board staff, yeah, staff communications with board members. Okay, Dr.
Yes.
Gant?
Yes, I'm okay with it being moved up to the board. I do know, Dr. Thomas, some of the conversations at least overlap with some of the norms that our team has been working on, as far as like, getting information and things like that. But yeah, I'm okay with it being moved up to the full board.
I agree, Dr. Gann, and I know Dr. Myers has mentioned that some of the areas of policy that we've been working on, there were already existing, some of the areas of norms, that we were working on, there were already policies that existed as well to support that. So this kind of seems to be a little
Mm-hmm.
necessarily overlap, but similar language.
Mm-hmm.
So when we work on this norm about this communications between board members and other people, then this will be cited in those norms like we've been doing with the other norms. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Honestly, I think we'll have to go back and look at it in our Friday meeting. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Thomas, I think this is the one we're picking up. And in this one, let's see, we're talking about prohibited from discouraging freely communicating about matters of public concern. It just deals more with communication. It doesn't talk about like public concern, and more so like getting communication with staff, with board members. So it's not as specific, but I'm just saying like some of the conversations seem to overlap. So it's a possibility that this policy might be referenced. But of course, once we send it to Dr. Myers and Mr. Pruitt, we'll be able to see like what overlaps with what.
The norm, when you send the norm or when you send the policy?
No, when we send the norm. We
Okay.
try to do as much looking at the policies as possible, but I know like last time we were saying that somewhere between work session or the development of the norm and work session and actually voting or accepting the norm, we need to run it through some other lenses to be sure. So it may be referenced. I'm just saying the conversations overlap somewhat.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just only say that the norms, of course, is how board members operate, how we get information, and this policy doesn't talk about us trying to seek out information. It's simply someone calls us, someone stops us at the grocery store, and they have, just because they're a staff member doesn't mean they can't do it. It's what we do at that point based on what they're saying.
Right. And to me, it gets very close to the same line, both of those. So if we talk about, or if we're talking about a situation with a school or whatever, the minute that a board member says, okay, well, wait a minute, I need more information from fill in the blank, whoever it is, I do think, they meet almost, they're not the same things, but they certainly, they have implications for each other.
Okay. Dawn, did you have any other comments about this one? Okay. Should we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of moving this up to the board for tonight's agenda? It will be 6.11.
Aye.
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 All right. That one passes. All right. Okay, it's 5:15. We're doing all right. Okay, so the next one is GBAA, Professional Personnel Merit System. And this one also seems to be kind of an unusual, very specific. It hasn't been touched since 2002. It talks about a $2,500 bonus for teachers who take or get a certificate from a particular national, what is it, National Board Certification Program developed by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Okay, so I am way out of my element here. I have no idea if this is unique, if this is one of many, how are teachers to receive these kinds of bonuses, and are there other options and alternatives?
This
So let
was,
me give you a little history on this one. When I first started doing this about a year and a half ago, I actually went over to Dr. Thomas and said, I can't find a person, and as far back as I go, who's actually gotten this. Let me use your historical knowledge. Can you? And she said, this is real old. We haven't, in looking back through, had anybody come to us and claim this as far back as I could find. And so that would be at least since we were in our current system that we're using. I don't, and Dr. Thomas can probably speak to it more from the teaching side of it, but from an HR point of view, we've had nobody come and ask us to pay them this.
I'm really not sure if they still do it. It was a huge push in the education profession probably 10 plus years ago. Teachers were encouraged to receive national board certification, and as a result, there was a financial incentive for that. I'm not even sure if it is a designation that still exists, as I haven't heard it promoted, encouraged, or even offered as a means of adding additional certifications in a number of years.
That's why I was unable to find it on the national board site. I wasn't able to find that as a valid option. It doesn't mean that it's not there and I missed it, but I couldn't, in going through all of our records and in looking on their site, find this to be current. I think the trend is shifted towards different like specialty certification options as opposed to this national board certification. And it's just a little bit of an outdated policy.
and just to go one step further, it was actually, from my recollection, it was funded by the state. That's why I was surprised to see it in a local policy, because when I was teaching, the money would come from the state.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, I believe we looked at this. The state no longer funds that. You there? We lose him?
You're muted. You're muted. Mike? Mike, can you unmute?
I don't know about the state. I looked at the organization's website. I mean, the organization still exists and they're still charging teachers. Actually, I think it's a little bit more than $2,500 to take the program. I don't know how many people, obviously not many people are participating in it anymore.
So do we just rescind, or Dr. Thomas, do you think there's a value in keeping in some kind of a bonus for any kind of extra training?
I think it can be rescinded. I'm surprised to hear Mike say that they exist as an organization. It's not anything that is currently promoted within our area. I wonder if it's regional. I think we could maybe go back and add something if this becomes a trend professionally again, but I don't see it as currently necessary.
Okay. I hate to get rid of ways of teachers to get more money, but okay.
I agree. It's not something that the state any longer funds, as Meredith mentioned. You don't even hear about it anymore. And it was a cost, you're right, Mike, to do that. It's just not something that's even promoted anymore. I'll be looking into that while we continue to talk.
Okay. All right, so that one would be completely rescinded. Looks like it was adopted in 1998 and revised in 2002, and it hasn't been touched since. So that makes sense if it's outdated. And again, we have 4 weeks. If there are other programs or other ways of getting teachers bonuses for taking extra training, let's stick them in. And
Right, I agree.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments or questions about this one?
I just sent you the link that I was looking at, Zernona, in the private chat.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'm looking at some things too.
Okay, so move forward. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of rescinding this one and sending it up to the board today? It will be 6.12, 612. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I think I heard everybody. I'm not sure.
Yeah, everybody sound.
Okay, it's 5:21. We're doing all right. So number 6, GBC is professional personnel recruitment. This policy was last revised in 2005. And from what I could tell, it's deleting a paragraph that is not potentially not reflecting current practice and adding additional
Gabby, do you know where the other cord is?
Dr. Gant, did you have a question?
I'm sorry, no, I didn't.
Okay. Mike, do you want to tackle this one for a second?
Sure. And this is one actually I didn't have a chance to talk with Meredith much about. So, I mean, from a legal perspective, it's fine. I just wrote the question, does it reflect current practice, just to sort of jog her to chime in on that point. And the other thing I had pointed out is the list of protected characteristics in the 3rd paragraph. We didn't add sexual orientation to this policy, which I think we need to do to be consistent with the others.
Okay.
I'm back and added those, Mike, on your recommendation. So I pulled straight from like GAA that we talked about in our non-discrimination, any equal opportunity and non-discrimination policy. We'd love for that phrase to be consistent and include all of those categories. So it is now with this change.
And Mike, you may not have seen it. I may have just responded to Dawn and Angela with this. When I read your comments, I completely agree that the wording needs to match up to all of our other protected groups. And then the bottom one doesn't really match current practice or jive very well with how things are done in the digital application recruitment world. It just doesn't quite go in that direction anymore. It goes in a much more fluid electronic format to kind of match the direction that society has gone in, you know, since this policy was created or last revised.
So you're okay deleting that last paragraph?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So again, this policy talks about recruitment and having an active non-discriminatory recruitment program, which I really like, of course. Does anything need to be added to this about what we do? You know, if the paragraph is removed, is there a sentence to add? Or is it an adequate as it is? Without that paragraph at all?
I feel like it's adequate without that paragraph at all, but.
Well, and we have a reg coming up that's got a lot more detail in it.
Right.
Correct. That's correct. Okay. All right. So this one, other comments about this one? Not hearing any. Shall we move it forward, or do we want to move it forward with the reg attached and do it in one fell swoop?
That
Okay,
makes
so
sense.
let's look at the reg. So, okay, so this one was quite detailed. I'm going to let you guys try to tackle this one. Dawn or whoever wants to tackle these details. Meredith, is this your?
I can go through this with Mike. We kind of looked at some minor changes. I agreed with all of the ones he suggested in his attorney memo. You know, this just really kind of fleshes out some of the things that we actually do as part of our recruitment. It's not really confining as written. It does allow for a good bit of flexibility and addresses everything in a pretty broad manner. I did like the changes that Mike recommended in his attorney's memo, and I believe Angela has incorporated those already. I emailed her and let her know that I agreed with those. This one is just a few minor wording changes to kind of make it flow a little better and read a little better.
So no substantive changes to the policy, just clarity.
Right.
It is interesting. This is one that's been asked about a lot recently on the board over the past few years. People have suggested that we create a minority recruitment plan, and I just want to know, we have had one
Right.
for dozens of years. So, and I think we've gotten better. When we know better, we do better. We've gotten smarter about the recruitment. We've positioned some really clever people in HR to recruit with strategies that we've borrowed from other districts. And so we're getting better at it. But the fact that we've acknowledged that it's important to have the intentionality of minority recruitment has been in our policy for a long time.
So why don't we take out and recruit and change that to and encourage?
Which line, Linda?
I'm sorry, that's number 2.
Let me see.
Under minority recruitment plan. So right now it says systemic visiting of historically Black institutions of higher learning in order to interview teacher candidates. So Linda, you were saying, I'm sorry, leave recruit or delete recruit?
So
I wanted to know why it was removed. It was
But
there,
Ms.
and I
Linda,
thought that was what
the
we're doing.
distinction is to make a distinction between encouraging people to apply for employment and an actual employment decision. Because if we went down and said, we will only hire you because you meet one of these groups, that would be not good. But to actively recruit them to apply, you're going to have any of the best candidates are going to automatically get selected. And I think there was just the distinction between encouraging people to apply for the job versus selectively hiring. Micah, does that make, am I saying this right?
Yeah, you're saying that's exactly right. I just thought that, recruit could be a little ambiguous. I mean, we recruit people to apply, but once they apply, we're colorblind. We have to be, unless we have an affirmative action plan that's gone through all the steps of approval, which virtually no one does at our level.
And we accomplish that by when the applicants are screened. One of the things that the hiring manager can't see is race on the application. So when they select candidates to interview, they're selecting based on qualifications, and that's how we meet the intent that Mike said.
And so I'm just getting to, if I look at the strategic plan and how we measure our success at recruitment of minority candidates, is it based on the fact that we went to an HBCU or that we actually were able to attract candidates?
I think our measurement in HR is actual hire of candidates. It is them starting day one of the job.
Okay.
Mr. Lawrence Harris also has some input into this policy. Mr. Harris?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Thomas. I'm going to be quick, but I was hoping that we could maybe consider adding minority serving institutions, because HBCUs are only one institution that serves students of color. So we have our Hispanic serving institutions as well as the tribal colleges. So minority serving would include all those.
Okay.
I think that's an excellent point.
So in that same sentence, number 2, instead of historically Black institutions of higher learning, add and minority serving institutions, or yeah, okay.
Is it add or replace? Add?
Add, I think, or does minority serving institutions inclusive of historically Black HBCUs?
It should, and it does, and depending on who you're asking. I'm not qualified to answer that question. I'm sorry.
I recognize historically Black as being specific.
HBCUs, yeah, me too.
What if you added and other minority serving institutions? That way you recognize that HBCUs are minority serving institutions as well.
Good, yeah. And I'm stumbling over this word systemic. Do we mean systematic?
Where's that at? I
At
apologize.
the beginning of that sentence, number 2. Systemic
Yes.
visiting?
Yes, that's a typo.
Systematic visiting. Okay.
As is the word qualifies, that should be qualified with a D towards the end of number 2.
So so number 2 should read systemic visiting of historically Black institutions of higher learning and other minority serving institutions in order to interview teacher candidates and encourage candidates most qualified to meet district needs.
Now, and encourage candidates to apply for employment. I just realized my suggestion replaced that whole qualified thing anyway.
Gotcha.
Okay, so delete that middle part. Okay.
That's a great change. Thank you. I was worried about that one.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that, Linda, so I recognize that's an important. Yeah, okay.
Meredith, do we practice 5 and 6 under a minority recruitment plan?
Yes, we do. When we have Mike
I mean,
actually
4,
has,
I'm sorry, 4 and 6. I'm sorry.
4 and 6. Let me look at 4.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, we do. We do number 4. A lot of times when we go to career fairs, that's one of the first questions we ask for principals who might have a volunteer to go with us is, do you have anyone who's graduated from the school? So that's something we do quite regularly. And then number 6, your other one. Yes, we do that as well. Michael Harris does a lot of our recruitment program administration, and he really has done some pretty amazing things. If you guys ever get a chance to sit in on some of the stuff he's doing, it's quite impressive, and it seems to be having a good impact. I'm very optimistic that in a couple of years we'll see a lot of increase in our recruitment numbers because of his effort right now.
Yeah, I just have Ovita ringing in my ears because this was her point, and she had a lot of examples that she expressed as concerns. So I'm very glad that we're doing that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Be clear, so Angela's got it. I think we're removing most qualified to meet district needs. Is that correct? And so the end of 2 is going to say, and encourage candidates to apply for employment, period.
Yes,
Yes, thank you.
I'm just reading through it again. Other comments or questions about some of these other changes? Are we okay with 7? Make all students, including minority students, aware of the opportunities available to them in pre-K-12 education. That seems
We've
fair.
actually stepped that up because we have a career track, both for pre-K and also for K-12.
Okay. Looks pretty good. Any other suggestions or changes to this? So we would move the GBC, which is the philosophy of recruitment, and GBC R1, the plan, the minority recruitment plan, and there's non-minority recruitment plans at the top of this that we did not change, correct? Yeah, we haven't made any changes to this one. The top one, the top half. Yeah, I didn't see any changes there. Okay. No other comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of moving GBC and GBC R1 to the board's discussion tonight? There'll be 6.13 and 6.14. Say aye.
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 Okay, all right. Thank you. All right, so we've got 7. Good job. We have about 10 minutes. Do we want to try to tackle GBK?
Can I take 20 seconds to convince you of why you should?
All right.
I think that this, if you read the attorney memo, we follow the Fair Dismissal Act. I remember Mr. Davis will recall we've actually got the Fair Dismissal Act into policy, even though we're not required to as a charter district. And all of this is governed by that. So this is just a recognition of that process. And so it's in complete compliance with the Fair Dismissal Act. We suspend with pay. And very rarely does this actually happen.
Okay. So we're just reviewing. We're not changing at all. Meredith, are we changing anything?
No.
No, ma'am, no changes. This is all going to stay the same because our other policy recognizes the Fair Dismissal Act. And so we will need to keep this in compliance with the Fair Dismissal Act.
Okay. Sounds good to me. Any other comments? All right, that was easy, I think. Shall we move
I
this
have
one
a
up?
quick question.
Oh, okay.
My phone and connection was acting up a little bit. Where it says at the sort of the middle of that sentence, let's see, for charges against employee. Okay, where it says a teacher, principal. Well, where is this for individuals who are not certified? Or I guess that would be like that are not under contract. Like what I know you said we follow the Fair Dismissal Act, which is important. What about people that don't fall into those categories? Where would we find that?
So we have some rules and some policies that specifically address classified employees that you guys will get through. This one specifically addresses teachers because it's professional personnel suspension, which is the kind of connotation for teachers under a contract. And then the classified policies address that. Now we do extend complaints and grievances to classified, and we have a rules and regulations for classified employees that's in a handbook that exists as well, that talks about these exact same things, but it just wouldn't be found in this policy because this specifically is addressing the professional personnel suspension versus the classified.
So instead of saying certified personnel suspension, it's professional. Do we need to fix that?
That's how it was. It's in almost all of our policies that way at the top in the title, because that's how it's kind of done throughout the GSBA and policy world.
What if we added the word certified in front of employee in the first part of the sentence, first part of the first sentence? So a teacher, principal, or other certified employee under contract. Is that what you mean?
Who me or?
Well, just clarity for your point, Dr. Gant.
My point is I just want to be sure that people that aren't under contract, that there's some type of process for them as well. This highlights teachers, principals, and other people under contract. And so my understanding is that it wouldn't be found here, but there is a fair process for people that are not, under contract that's followed or that's listed in our policy. I think that's what I hear you saying, Meredith.
Okay.
I'm trying to find the exact policy for you. I believe it is GCN. It addresses separation and discipline for classified personnel, and we will get through reviewing that as well.
Okay, thanks.
It's one of the ones that will come up. It was last reviewed on November 2018, so it'd be due come fall for review again. But if you want to reference, it's policy GCN.
Okay. So we don't need to clarify this. It says any other employee under contract. So we don't have to put the word certified. Okay.
Actually, I think that'd be a good idea.
You like that,
Yeah.
Mike? You like certified?
I kind of do, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that we actually have any non-certified people under contract, but if we ever did, this would only apply to certified people because it's straight out of Fair Dismissal Act, which only applies to certified.
And, you know, I don't know that we do at the moment either, but you never know, that could change tomorrow. So I think that's fair.
Okay. Yeah, anytime when there's words that mean the same thing but are different, it's complicated. Like professional and certified, I wouldn't necessarily know are the same because I'm new to this.
Let me just kind of ask a question. If we have, how do we classify someone who works at the Career Academy who is a professional? Let's say he or she is a welder and teaching welding full time. They're a professional, but they may not be certified by the Board of Education, by the Department of Education, right?
That's a great point. And actually, could we say, Mike, one thing about saying certified, to Greg's point, is we have another policy that addresses a person is certified or where certification has been waived by blah, blah, blah. I think the charter district statute or whatever, because we do have a good many teachers who, like Greg said, specifically in the trades, have had their certification requirement covered under a waiver. So maybe certified is not the best word. We used it somewhere else where we said certified or where certification has been waived per whatever the statute was. And it may even be the fair dismissal policy that we talked about that. But Greg,
Maybe, yeah, good point, good point.
That's
So
GBN.
are these tradesmen somehow certificated in some way, or they carry union cards or something like that? I'm just curious.
I don't know about the union cards. They would be someone who a teaching certificate was waived for. I could find out from the certification ladies exactly what label. Do they get like a clearance certificate or something of that nature? Really outside of my area of expertise on exactly what type of.
I don't want to take us off course here. I was just thinking tradesmen in addition to certified, but I'm good.
Yeah, I think, well, and that's actually a good point. Meredith, look at when you're going back and looking at this, seems like I recall people like Greg is talking about, they still get the clearance certificate from PSC. They just don't have the teaching certification.
They do. And I guess that's a technicality because technically, I mean, I have a PSC certificate, but I am not a certified teacher. So I think certified is fine. I think now that we say that and we kind of work through it because they will have a clearance certificate of some kind.
Meredith, I think the language you're remembering, I think it would say something like a teacher, principal, or other employee serving in a certified position.
There you go.
Then you're
That's it.
saying the person who's in the position, not what the position is. Let's talk about the person in that position.
That's it. You're exactly right. That's the wording because it talked about the job versus the person.
Okay, so that's what we want to add, or other employees serving in other employees under contract serving in a certified position for a definite term.
So that would also cover let's say we wanted some type of exotic language that there's a demand among our students and there is no certification for it per se.
Yeah.
Or that the person has at least. So that would cover that person as well, right?
Right. That's correct. I like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
So can we leave under contract at the end? Can we say a teacher, principal, or other person serving in a certified position or other employee serving in a certified position under contract for a definite term? Because all of those people would be under contract.
Mhm.
That's correct.
That clarifies it for me.
Ditto.
Teacher, principal, or other employee serving in a certified
certified
position under contract.
Correct.
No, that's
No,
yeah,
you already
just
got under contract. Just take out, yep.
Just take out the word employee and I think you got it.
Okay. Looks awesome.
Angela, you don't need to strike through that employee because the word employee was already in there. It was already in the original policy. It already said or other employee. So you're just adding serving in a certified position. Correct. Delete. Yep. Okay.
No. No, just delete employee because the word employee is there already.
Delete the whole word. Don't strike through. Yep. And if we want to be exactly right, just highlight
Other.
serving in a certified position. Other employees already existing in the policy. We're not changing that. So get rid of that highlight. Correct. Okay, great. Yep, that's what we added.
Great. Any other comments, questions about this one? Linda, I heard your approval. Dr. Gant and Dr. Maddox?
I don't have any
with it.
additional things to add.
Okay. Dr. Maddox, I got garbled a little bit.
I'm good.
Okay, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor of moving this up?
Aye.
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 So that one will be 6.15. No, yeah, 6.15. All right, we've got through quite a few. It's been requested to give Angela a few minutes to do this work and send it up and get it onto board docs. Or no, she's just gonna send it to me and then I'm gonna report it. And also to give everybody a 10 to 15 minute break before the board meeting starts at 6.
Have a great afternoon. See you this evening.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everyone. That was awesome.
See you in 10 minutes.
See you in a few.
Thanks.
Good job, Angela.